looks like we might be getting close to the real truth on what actually happened to Maddeleine McCann. Hey guys, welcome back to my channel. If you're new here, please do subscribe, and if you're old here, hello again. My name is Kate Philpott and I cover true crime cases on my channel. And I know I haven't been uploading in a while. I knew my uploads are going to be quite sparse, but I didn't realise they'd be quite this sparse. I will talk about that kind of stuff at the end of the video, but for now, what is most important is today we're delving into a very well-known case. There is no case as hopeless, but at the same time as hopeful as the case of Maddeleine McCann. It's a case that stuck with me from day one. I remember hearing about it and being really shook because I had been to resorts like the one that Maddeleine disappeared from. My parents left me alone when they went out to restaurants, and to see a little girl disappear in that manner, it just really makes you think, even as a 10-year-old. And it is actually my most requested case ever, which I am surprised about because there's so much coverage on it, but there have been a lot of requests, particularly with the updates that have happened within the last year or so. We might actually be getting to real answers on this case. I will be kind of giving an overview of her actual disappearance. I'll be more so focusing on the most recent stuff. But in order for any of that to make sense, I think it's really important that we do have an overview of her actual disappearance and some of the details around that, because they could easily tie into what I'll be talking about in the second half of this video. A quick little disclaimer, I do apologize if any of this information is incorrect or inaccurate. It's just what I found online and merged into one video. But let's get into it. So this is the case of Maddeleine McCann. Maddeleine McCann was born in Leicester on the 12th of May 2003. She was a gorgeous little girl with blonde hair, and she had a distinctive dark spot on the iris of her right eye. Her parents, Kate and Jerry McCann, are both physicians, Kate being from Liverpool, Jerry being from Glasgow. And like I said, they had Maddeleine in 2003, and then they had twins, a boy and a girl, in 2005. So let's get into the holiday. In May 2007, as we know, the McCanns went on holidays to the Ocean Club Resort in Praia da Luz, and this is in the Algarve, Portugal. They went away with 7 friends and their children as well, so there were 8 children in total. And every night they would put the kids to bed, and at 8:30 p.m. all the couples would meet up in the tapas restaurant, which was on the resort. The McCanns were staying in apartment 5A, and in this apartment all the kids were staying in the one room. So you had the twins in the middle of the room in 2 separate cots, as well as Madeline's bed, which was at the wall on the opposite side of the window. And it was the 3rd of May 2007 where everything would change for the McCanns forever. They had a normal day that day and they put the kids to bed at around 7 p.m. By 8:35 p.m. the McCanns arrived at the tapas restaurant, and it took just under half an hour for the whole group to arrive. So they had this system for checking on the kids where every 20 to 30 minutes or so, one of the members of the group would go and check on the kids, and they would kind of rotate it. So at 9:05 p.m. it was Jerry who was going to check on the kids, so he went to their apartment and he notices that the children's door is open a lot more than they would have left it open. It was about 45 degrees open. Normally they would leave it just ajar, so maybe 5 degrees. So that is a significant difference. But he then sees that all 3 of the children are asleep in their beds, and he just closes the door back over it just so that it is just ajar. I wonder if someone was hiding in the apartment while Jerry was there. That's strange. Why is the door open already at this point of the night? I don't know. So only 5 minutes later, Jane Tanner, which is a well-known name in this case, is walking up the road that the McCann's apartment was right beside, and she notices something that would end up being a major talking point in this case for years to come. She sees a man up the top of the road walking away from the McCann's apartment, but he's holding a young child across his arms, and this young child is wearing pink pajamas. Needless to say, Maddeleine was wearing pink pajamas. So this stuck in her mind, but obviously it didn't mean a whole lot at this point because nobody knew yet what was about to happen. At 9:30 p.m, Matthew Oldfield, another member of the group, goes to check on the children. He also notices that the McCann's children's bedroom door is a lot more open than ajar, but I mean, Jerry didn't say, oh, by the way, it was open wider than we thought and then I closed it over again. Like, he didn't know that there was anything strange going on about the door. Matthew then looks into the kids' bedroom, he sees the twins in their cots, but at the angle he was standing at, he couldn't actually see Madeleine in her bed. So technically, she may or may not have been there. But anyway, he returns to the tapas restaurant and the night continues. At 10 p.m. then, half an hour later, Kate goes to check on the kids. And this is when she notices that Madeleine is not in her bed. So she briefly checks the apartment, but obviously Maddie wasn't there. She also notices that the window in the children's bedroom was open, and they didn't leave it open. So straight away, she runs back to the restaurant and she's screaming, Madeleine's gone, someone's taken her. And just minutes after that, the authorities were notified. Okay, so I'm not going to go into the nitty-gritty details of the rest of that night or anything, but I'm just going to have a quick little word on the investigation. So, unfortunately, the investigators made a lot of mistakes when it came to this case, and these mistakes essentially corrupted the entire investigation. And the reason for this was because these investigators were basically glorified security guards. They were not trained sufficiently to deal with a case like this at all. I just can't help but think if they had been sufficiently trained, or, you know, they didn't make these ridiculous mistakes, which I'll mention in a second, maybe this would have been solved way earlier. Maybe they would have gotten Madeleine back without any harm being done to her, or oh, I got chills. I know we shouldn't think like that, but I can't help myself. Okay, so into these mistakes, again, I'm just going to briefly overview this. It was not sealed as a crime scene in any way, shape, or form. The amount of people that trampled this crime scene is unheard of. Obviously, it wasn't forensically sealed, and unbelievably, the apartment was cleaned and rented out to a new tenant before DNA samples were even taken. Are you for real? So even though about 600 DNA samples were taken, they were all badly contaminated and mixed with new tenants and mixed with these security guard investigators, and oh my god, my blood is boiling. They allowed the search dogs into the apartment before they even took DNA samples. So they have these dogs like running around like breathing like dogs do, and probably drooling and little particles of saliva or, you know, their breath or whatever. Just contaminating this crucial DNA. How can you even make that mistake? It's just such a rookie mistake. Like, even if you're not into true crime, I feel like that's such a thing that everyone knows. Oh, I don't know. Blah. Anyway, moving on. Before I scream, what I will say is that they did find traces of blood inside the McCann's apartment, as well as inside the rental car that the McCanns rented out, but they didn't rent it out until weeks later, so that's strange, but we'll get to that in a sec. When the blood samples were tested, the blood from the apartment did not come back as Maddie's, and the blood from the rental car came back as inconclusive. So let's just put ourselves into believing that the blood in the rental car is Maddie's, just to play devil's advocate. They rented that car out like 3 weeks after Madeleine disappeared. So they would have had to hide Madeleine or Madeleine's body or whatever evidence for 3 weeks, while there was this media frenzy always following them around. Like, everybody was looking for Maddie. And then after those 3 weeks, move her body again, with reporters constantly watching them, authorities constantly watching them, the entire world honestly watching them. They would have to move her body, put it and transport it somewhere without anybody knowing. I mean, this whole thing about the blood in the rental car is important to discuss. Why is there blood in a rental car anyway? You know, that's a bit weird. And the people who rented it out had their daughter go missing. That's also weird. Okay, so yes, you do have to think about these things. But this is me dabbling in one of the major theories at the beginning of the case, and that's actually what we're going to get to next anyway. The theories that have emerged over the years. So obviously the first theory I'm going to talk about is that Kate and Jerry had something to do with Madeleine's disappearance. Portuguese authorities originally believed that Madeleine had died in some kind of accident inside the apartment, perhaps after being sedated to help her sleep. And the theory goes that, like I said, her parents hid her body for 3 weeks, and then transported it somewhere where nobody would ever find it. All of this in an attempt to cover up her death. You can imagine that if this was the case, that they accidentally sedated her too much and it killed her, that they might want to hide her body because they were both doctors. I would imagine that would be pretty bad for your career if you accidentally gave somebody too many drugs, that somebody being your daughter, and it ended in their death. I don't know, let me know what you think, but in 2007 they were actually officially named suspects, but due to the lack of evidence, this was lifted in July of 2008. There were also apparently several discrepancies in the McCann's statements, as well as the statements of several of their friends that were traveling with them. One rumor was even that the group of friends were a group of swingers that were all sedating their children. Oh my god, man. The media. That's not me laughing, I'm just like in shock that like where is that coming from? Anyway, also what could make you believe this theory is that there was no sign of forced entry anywhere in the apartment. However, with that said, A, the patio door was left unlocked, and the McCanns left this unlocked so that they didn't have to jingle their keys every time they came in to check on the kids because they didn't want to wake the kids. But also, the window in the children's bedroom was open, and they didn't normally leave it open. However, in contrast with that, the only fingerprints on that window were Kate's fingerprints. So, just interesting to note. Another thing that made people suspicious of Kate and Jerry was Kate immediately started screaming, "Madeleine's been taken." And a lot of people thought that maybe this was an attempt for her to try and plant the seed in people's minds that Madeleine was taken, to take the heat off her and Jerry. Well, I mean, having stayed in resorts like this, I can just totally understand why your mind would go to, oh my god, she's been taken. Like, I'm not saying the area or these kind of areas are sketchy, but it can be easier for a predator of some sort to target tourists and tourist children as victims because they may not know the area as well as the locals, and you're often very aware of this whole thing when you go on holidays to these kind of places. Anyway, I know this theory was very popular for a while, and it seemed like everywhere you looked people thought that Kate and Jerry were responsible for Madeleine's disappearance, but I'm gonna go on record and say not once did I ever believe that. It always just made me so emotional seeing Kate and Jerry standing in front of these reporters, taking pictures of them. Call me naive, I don't know, but it just screamed abduction to me from the word go. Okay, into the next theory. Another relatively strong theory over the years is that someone who worked at the resort had something to do with Madeleine's disappearance. The reason for this is that the reservation in the tapas restaurant was a block booking. So basically there was a booking for every single night with the note beside it that they wanted the same table, the same time every night, 8:30 p.m, because they were leaving their young children alone. So whether someone who worked in the resort saw that as an opportunity, and potentially if they worked at the resort they could also gain access to apartments, who knows, or whether they were enabling somebody else. Definitely an interesting one to think about, but again, the staff members have been looked into and obviously nothing has come from that. So the next theory is about Robert Murat. He was a 33-year-old British Portuguese man who lived very close to the Ocean Club Resort, in the direction that the man from the Jane Tanner sighting was walking. And Robert Murat was the case's first official suspect. He later stated that he had actually gone to pick his own daughter up from the Ocean Club Resort creche, which is interesting because I did see his own mother being interviewed and she said that he was home all night. But anyway, Robert Murat positioned himself weirdly close to the investigation. He was always talking to reporters, he seemed to be asking a lot of questions. It just seemed like he was trying to stay very close to the overall investigation. But this ended up being more of a red herring than anything. Now, what I will say though is there was another sighting, as well as the Jane Tanner sighting, of a man near the Ocean Club Resort that night, around that time, holding a child, a little girl in light pajamas to be exact. And this person was also walking away from the Ocean Club Resort. So here are the EFIT images for this sighting. Interestingly enough though, this EFIT ended up bringing a tip in 2013, a few years later, when Kate and Jerry went on German TV, and this tip was the suggestion of the name Christian Brueckner. More on that in a little bit. Okay, it's also got to be considered with any missing person case really that the person went off on their own. And in the case of a 3, nearly 4-year-old little girl in an area she didn't know very well, this could have easily been her wandering off, maybe looking for her parents. And if this had been the case, then maybe she was abducted by a passerby, or maybe she even fell into one of the nearby construction sites. And I feel like, just on the note of the construction sites, I just feel like surely she would have been found if that were the case. With the whole theory of her wandering off, this sounds plausible, yeah. But then for this to happen, she would have had to open the patio doors, which, yeah, to be fair, they were unlocked, but then also close the curtains behind her inside the apartment and close the door again behind her. She would also have had to open the child gate at the top of the stairs, close that behind her as well, and finally open and close the gate leading to the street. So all in all, it would have to be a situation where Maddie herself was thinking, ooh, I'm gonna get out and I'm gonna make it look like I didn't do it on my own. Which, let's be real, A, seems a little unlikely for a 3-year-old, and B, kind of already points at another theory of abduction. Lastly, before we get into the more recent stuff, one of the major theories over the years of what happened to Maddeleine McCann is that she was abducted and sold into child sex trafficking. Now, if this was the case, I genuinely am asking this question, so please let me know in the comments if you are aware or you know more about this kind of thing. I did try to look it up online and I really couldn't find a straight answer, but what happens if a child sex trafficking victim becomes too old? Now, to be fair, if Madeline is still alive, she would now be 17, turning 18 in May. So, okay, yeah, technically she would still be a minor, but she would definitely be on the higher end of that scale. But if there is a cutoff age, what happens to them? Like, do they kill them? Do they get rid of them in some way? They hardly just set them free into the world after everything they've done to them. Of course, so if she had been killed, there's never been a body found. So there is no solid evidence that Madeline is even dead. However, again, more updates on this in a little bit. The last theory I want to mention is actually that Maddie McCann is still alive and out there somewhere. Probabilities aside and all that stuff, I still think it's important to give this theory the time of day, because again, there's no solid proof that we know of that she is dead. Let's say, for example, she was abducted and sold to some family. They may not have known who she was. They may not have known that she was Maddeleine McCann. They may have been from some other country where it wasn't as widely televised, or who knows. And if that is the case, then Maddie would be growing up among us. In the last year or so, I know there definitely have been a number of TikToks where people have said, okay, these are my circumstances, I think I might be Maddie McCann. Or some people have even called out others and said, hey, I think you might be Maddie McCann. And yeah, like, there's always the possibility that this could be for clout or whatever, but what if one of these stories is actually true? Because the thing is, there's no solid proof that they're not true. You have to at least go there in your mind, at least even just for a moment. And let's also be honest, if Maddeleine McCann is out there, she probably is on TikTok. She would be Gen Z. Gen Z are everywhere on TikTok and Instagram and who knows what other social platforms. Maybe she even has a YouTube channel and she could easily just not know that she is the Maddeleine McCann. Anyway, that's just a theory that there's not really any proof for, but again, there's not really any proof against. It's just more an incredibly interesting one to think about. Over the years, I'm sure there have been plenty more other theories. I'm not going to go into every single one of them. I just wanted to have a quick little overview of the main ones. So if there are any more that you know of that you think are quite interesting, or that you think maybe had something to them, then definitely leave them in the comments and we can open a bit of a discussion about it. But in the meantime, I'm going to move into the most recent developments in the Maddeleine McCann case. So some of you, I'm sure, have heard the name Christian B, or Christian Brueckner, who in 2020 was named as the prime suspect in the Madeleine McCann case, and investigators seem to be pretty confident in the information that they do have on this guy. So let's dive into who he is, why he's been linked to this case, and what we can expect in the next couple of months or years. Before I do go into who this guy is though, I just want to say the prosecutor, I literally saw him say in an interview, and I quote, "We are sure that Christian Brueckner killed Maddie McCann." That is a huge statement. That is huge, particularly because German authorities have this reputation for being very tight-lipped about ongoing investigations, and unless they know something for sure, they're not just going to say it publicly. This is the kind of language they're using when they talk about him and his links to Madeleine McCann and the case. But anyway, we'll get into that and what we do know in a sec. And I wanted to find out a little bit about his early life, but honestly there's very little. There's basically nothing online about his early life, and everything kind of just starts at the age of 15 for him when his life of crime begins. So it's best that we just dive straight into his criminal history. So his crime spree is said to have started at the age of 15 when he was arrested for theft. 2 years later, at the age of 17, he was arrested for child sexual assault. But he actually escaped Germany and fled to Portugal so that he didn't have to serve that sentence. And he ended up living near Praia de Luz. Praia de Luz? Bear with me, I think it's meant to be pronounced luge, and I keep saying lose. It's just what keeps coming out of my mouth, I'm sorry. But anyway, he did have a bit of a reputation for kind of fleeing the country whenever authorities were onto him. So he would just like bounce around Europe, moving to different places. Coward! But anyway, he made his living primarily with theft of apartments and hotel resorts, as well as small-time drug dealing. In fact, he was actually responsible for over 20 burglaries in Praia de Luz alone. And these burglaries often took place in apartments similar to apartment 5A where the McCanns are staying, because, you know, easy to access, close to the main road, either windows are easy to open or doors are left unlocked, that type of thing. So in 1999 then he was extradited back to Germany to serve his sentence for the child sexual assault, and sometime between 2004 and 2005 he returned to Praia de Luz. In fact, he lived only 1.27 kilometers away from the Ocean Club Resort in Praia de Luz, and this guy is now a convicted sex offender. Also, I feel like it is important to mention that there was no sex offender register in Portugal at the time. The authorities were aware that he was there, but there was no like official setup around that kind of thing. I'm guessing they've learned their lesson at this point. In 2005 then, he raped and attacked a 72-year-old American woman in Praia de Luz. And on top of this, he recorded the entire thing on video. Interestingly, in 2004, an Irish woman called Hazel Behan had also been raped in her ground floor apartment near Praia de Luz. The young German attacker also filmed the attack. Anyway, Christian Brueckner was back and forth for a while. He was in and out of all these different countries, moving around, running from the law, committing a lot of crimes. Some were financially motivated, obviously. He was known in the Praia de Luz area for frequently stealing from hotels and holiday apartments, as well as some drug trafficking. And obviously the other side of his crimes were the sexually motivated ones, like what he did to this poor 72-year-old woman, and potentially Hazel Behan as well, and the child in Germany. Oh, and who knows how many more. So this all brings us right up to 2007 when Madeleine McCann disappeared. So with that in mind, I want to talk about what we know so far that links Christian Brueckner to Madeleine McCann, because initially when this name came out, it kind of just seemed so random because he had done a pretty good job of fleeing the country. Firstly, he did live in Praia de Luz at the time of Madeleine McCann's disappearance. In fact, he moved there in December of 2006, and it was only 5 months later in the May that Madeleine went missing. So he was there for those 5 months, and he literally left Praia de Luz only days after Madeleine McCann disappeared. That alone is probably quite telling, although I'm just also thinking that maybe because it was such massive news and he was a convicted sex offender, maybe he was just like, oh god, this looks like it was me, and fled. Just plain devil's advocate, we'll get to some more stuff in a little sec. Anyway, a few days after Madeleine McCann disappeared, he fled and went back to Germany. And on top of this, before he went back to Germany, literally the day after Madeleine McCann disappeared, he cancelled the registration on his car. I believe at this point this vehicle has been seized from whoever the new owner was, and authorities are currently in possession of it. So I wonder if they have gathered any kind of evidence from that. But that's that about the vehicle. Next though, there's the fact that his phone data placed him basically at the Ocean Club Resort. In fact, his phone connected to the mast at the Ocean Club Resort between 9 p.m. and 10 p.m. that night. Remember, the last time Madeleine McCann was definitely seen was 9:05 p.m. when Jerry went and checked on her. And also at this point, the children's bedroom door had been kind of open. So I wonder at this point, was Christian Brueckner in the apartment? Was he hiding in a wardrobe? I mean, the parents definitely didn't check the wardrobes or whatever. So I mean, who knows? So essentially, right, 9:05 p.m. Jerry McCann sees Madeleine McCann in her bed. 9:30 p.m. Matthew Oldfield checks on the kids, sees the twins, but at the angle he was standing at, he didn't actually see Madeleine McCann in her bed. And at 10 p.m. Kate goes and checks on them and Madeleine is gone. So between 9:05 p.m. and 10 p.m. at some point, Madeleine was taken. And within that hour, Christian Brueckner's phone sent a signal to the Ocean Club Resort's mast. Basically, a single call was made within that hour, apparently just outside the Ocean Club. Now, the only thing I'll say about this is they haven't actually been able to confirm that it definitely was Christian Brueckner on the phone. Maybe somebody else had his phone, but it was definitely his phone number. And you might be thinking, okay, well, there's a phone call that took place, so who was on the other end of that phone call? And the police have been trying to figure out who this person was, but it was a burner phone and they can't track it to anybody in particular. So, I mean, that detail alone is kind of sketchy. I mean, I've never felt the need to have a burner phone. Why is this convicted sex offender outside the resort within the hour that Madeleine McCann went missing on the phone to someone with a burner phone? Like, it's all a little sketchy. Oh, I'm sorry. His phone was on the phone to someone, but we've no proof that it was him. But anyway. But then let's also be honest here. He was clearly a criminal. He's probably going to know a good few people that function off burner phones. Anyway, on to the next potential link that we know of. He also owned this abandoned factory in northern Germany, which held a lot of jarring information, honestly. Upon searching this property, authorities would uncover photos and videos that would raise questions about his connection to the Madeleine McCann case. But what does that mean? Well, there were USB sticks that were put in a plastic bag and buried underneath his dead dog. And, okay, prepare yourself for this one. These USB sticks held over 8,000 child abuse images and videos. There were also not one, not two, but 3 young girls' swimsuits in his motorhome, which was also on the property. Actually, I wonder if any of these were Maddie's. Who knows? Anyway, sorry, I'm just kind of thinking out loud here. Anyway, moving on to 2014, there were 391 photos and 68 video files of child pornography confiscated from his German home. And this is on top of the other 8,000 images. By the way, why in the world did he even own an abandoned factory? Who the owns an abandoned factory? Especially if you're a sex offender. It's pretty sketchy. Anyway, on top of all of this, Christian B has drunkenly confessed to a friend that he knows something about what happened to Madeline McCann. And a former friend of his came forward in 2017 to authorities about this. And another former friend of Christian B's said he knows that Christian did it. It's interesting to hear these kind of perspectives from people that obviously knew him very well. Anyway, I will also just say before I move on to what's happened in Christian's life in the following years after Maddie McCann's disappearance, that if he is guilty of this, there is a possibility that this just started out as a burglary. And as disgusting as it is, he saw an opportunity. He was in an apartment alone noticed that there were young children there and wanted to take advantage of this vulnerable little girl. And he did target victims of any age as long as he deemed them weak and vulnerable. But according to authorities, because of all of this, Christian B is considered the most important suspect in the entirety of the 13 years that Madeline McCann has been missing for. More so than Kate and Jerry ever were. So all of that is why we suspect the living daylights out of this guy. And on top of that, authorities have said that there is more evidence that obviously isn't public yet. I'll speak a little bit more about that kind of thing in a few minutes. Okay, so moving into the years after Madeline McCann's disappearance, Christian B kept a pretty low profile. Interesting. The next thing we kind of hear about is in 2012 when he opens up a kiosk in northwest Germany. This kiosk was right next to a junior school and a kindergarten. At lunchtime and before and after school, the kids would buy sweets there and he would give them lollies for free. Oh god, I feel sick. What came to light the following year in 2013, Christian B was linked to a Skype chat room for pedophiles where he openly discussed his fantasies of I can't even say it. There were some quotes that allegedly came from him saying he wanted to catch something small and use it for days. In 2014 then, he was charged with sexual abuse of a 5-year-old, from which he was sentenced to 15 months in prison. And I believe it was actually his girlfriend's daughter that was the 5-year-old in question, because an ex-girlfriend also came forward to say that they had a 9-month relationship where the two of them lived together with her daughter. This ex-girlfriend stated that Christian had assaulted her daughter in a public park before taking graphic photos of this young girl to keep. The ex-girlfriend also reported that he would abuse her frequently, and a lot of the time he was aggressive and fell-tempered. Also, just while we're speaking about Christian Brueckner's past love life, I feel like it's important to mention this. This may or may not be surprising to you, but Christian had a history of dating much younger women. In fact, basically teenage girls, one of which came forward to say that he actually strangled her on one occasion, and that overall he was very charming on the outside and could kind of charm your socks off, but he was very fell-tempered and very violent over the years with a lot of his girlfriends. I've just got alarm bells ringing in my head saying psychopath, psychopath. When he was back in the Algarve, he was arrested for exposing himself to young children in the public park, and he was then extradited back to Germany for drug trafficking in 2017. And listen, I'm going to be honest here, there were a bunch of conflicting statements about what years he was in what places and what places he was in and what years and when and where he did certain crimes, but the overall moral of the story is much the same. That Christian Brueckner is a psychopathic individual, a monster with what's described as an escalating fantasy of violence, and what I like to call a burning piece of shit. So this brings us to the relatively recent past. In December of 2019, Christian Brueckner was sentenced to 7 years in a German prison for the rape of the 72-year-old woman in Praia de Luz, which happened back in 2005. And he tried to appeal it, but he was denied over expected relapse, which is fair based on the patterns he has shown over the years. By the way, how dare he even try to appeal that? There was literally a video of the entire assault. Okay, this then brings us to June 2020, where really hit the fan, because on the 4th of June, Christian Brueckner was officially named the prime suspect in the Madeline McCann case. And in the press conference where this was announced, they basically confirmed that they believe that Madeline McCann is dead, and so they're treating this as a murder investigation. Oh, okay. I apologize. We had a battery outage and I didn't have any batteries that were fully charged, so it's a few hours later. You can probably tell the room is darker. But moving on, there have also been several interviews with the prosecutor, and he is very confident that they have strong evidence to suggest that Christian Brueckner was the one that not only was involved in the disappearance, but that killed Madeline McCann. He says that there's no forensic evidence as such. I mean, how could there be, considering how badly contaminated the crime scene was? But they have other evidence. They obviously haven't said what this evidence is, whether it's pictures or videos, or it's not public yet. Also in June 2020, investigators came out and said that they wanted to retest a saliva sample from the crime scene, but I haven't been able to find an update on that just yet. They also searched his old home that he used to live in, and they found a hidden cellar. But prosecutors also believe that there are more people out there that know what happened to Maddie McCann, whether Christian B has told them over the years, either drunkenly or whatever, or if maybe even they were involved, or I mean, someone was on the other end of that phone call. So who is that person? If that person knows something, I mean, yeah, they're probably pretty scared that they're gonna get in some kind of trouble too, because they've been withholding all this evidence all these years. But I mean, I'm sure they would get some kind of immunity deal. This is such a high profile case. I reckon the authorities would be willing to sacrifice a couple of years or months behind bars for someone who withheld information in order for it to be solved. I don't know. I'm no lawyer, but yeah, I don't know. But they're hoping to get to the bottom of this case really soon. The fact that they've literally said that they have strong evidence that Madeleine McCann is dead and that Christian Brueckner did it is pretty telling, actually, especially considering how tight-lipped German authorities generally are when it comes to cases that are ongoing. So yeah. But of course I will say Christian Brueckner's defense attorney is saying, well, he's innocent until proven guilty. And I mean, that's I feel like that's probably his only argument. I don't know, like, either way, there are a lot of people out there that feel that there are definitely more victims out there of Christian Brueckner's. Like, he's been linked to a few others that are actually being re-investigated. At this stage, I honestly would not be surprised, because he seems to have this unquenchable thirst. But this all brings us to present day. The search in this new investigation has unfortunately been impacted by the pandemic, but Kate and Jerry still have a lot of hope that they'll get some kind of answers and closure. They really deserve answers. They really deserve closure, particularly having been suspects in their own daughter's disappearance. Like, I cannot even imagine the pain that caused. And also, I can't help but think about their other two children, the twins, that are now, I think, about 15 years old, and they have been growing up without their older sister and no answers. And it must be very jarring for them to know that when she did disappear, they were in the room, but they were too young to do anything about it or to notice that there was anything going on. I would imagine that has some psychological effects. Of course, if there are updates on the Madeleine McCann case, I will definitely keep you updated either in the comments here or on my Instagram, Twitter, or my TikTok, all of which are katephilpott_YT. So definitely give me a follow on there. And thank you so much for watching this video. I do apologize that I haven't been able to upload quite as frequently. I'm definitely still not ready to get back to regular scheduling. That will probably be, I'm guessing, around the end of March. Hopefully by then it'll all be back to normal, and in the meantime, I'm just gonna do my best. But I genuinely appreciate your patience with me so much, so thank you. Otherwise, leave a comment with your thoughts on the Madeleine McCann case. Were there ever any theories that you thought this is definitely it, and now have your opinions changed based on what's come out about Christian Brueckner? Also, if you've gotten this far, please make sure you're subscribed and you've hit the notification bell, particularly right now with my very sparse and all over the place uploads. You don't know when I'm gonna post, I don't know when I'm gonna post, so you're best just to get notified and YouTube will tell you and you're good. Again, thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye guys, you're pretty. Mwah. Yes, American Airlines. Yes. What am I doing? So his crime scene is spread to what? He was known in the Pride of Luz area for being what? I'm out of breath. Oh my god, it's 10 to 4. Where'd the day go? Where'd the day go? Oh, I'm hungry. Oh, I'm hungry. Yeah.